webinar into two areas. The first will be talking about the budget update, and then the second will be going over some of the key requirements of the talent pipeline. And so we'll have an opportunity after we go over both of those segments at the conclusion of us going through the material. We'll have an opportunity to break for Q&A. I don't anticipate that this webinar will take the full 2 hours. This is the second of two webinars, and I think the first one ran for approximately 45 minutes to an hour with questions. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and just give you kind of a status of where we're at. I want to reiterate a message that was sent out by Lorraine Wareham, who I should mention that Lorraine Wareham, and I see Deb Waldrop and several other DCEO staff are on the line. I know that as we move forward, they're absolutely resources to assist you through this project. But as far as a budget update, I know that DCEO sent out some updates over the last several weeks just regarding where we're at. Y'all should have your grant agreement in place. You are authorized to incur costs or expenditures against the grant and to move forward with your project. However, and this is important, and one of the main focuses of this call, we want to emphasize that grantees cannot be reimbursed for costs incurred after July 1st until there is a state budget in place. So from a practical standpoint, we understand that this could have a significant impact on your projects, your project plans, and the timing in which you roll out your scope of activities. So we recognize that every project is different. We know that some of your training providers have the ability to kind of hold their billing. Others do not. So we don't want you to be in a situation where it's a surprise, where you come to us in 2 weeks posting your costs in our system and expecting a reimbursement, a timely reimbursement. Unfortunately, until there is a state budget, we are not able to reimburse for those costs. You are able to post for those costs. However, we cannot pay those out. I do also want to emphasize that any costs, and again, I know the grants were issued in June, but any costs that you have accrued in June, those costs, you can request a reimbursement for those costs. However, we're getting to the point where our accounting office, it's called a lapse period spending, and it's typically 45 days after the end of the period here. And so August 5th, this coming Wednesday, is the deadline for any of those June costs. As several of you know, we typically ask you to report your costs on the 20th for the previous month, but we recognize that because this was a startup month, there may be some costs that just didn't get posted for June, and our accounting office again is telling us if those costs are posted and you have a cash request in the system by August 5th, then we should be able to pay those out. After the 5th, we cannot, we cannot pay other cash requests until there is a state budget in place. So with that, Scarlett, if we could open up the phones or unmute the phone lines and take any initial questions here.
State budget narušavjuša.
Yes. So the question is, one of the questions I see in the chat pod is, do we still have the regular monthly, still have the monthly reports? So yes, you should still post your costs to GRS on a monthly basis. We're going to go over some of the other reporting requirements as part of a general overview of the grant requirements later on in the presentation. But yes, my understanding is that the system will stay on to post costs by the 20th, but you won't be able to request cash. Okay. Any other questions on this piece of information? Okay, and Scarlett, if you could help me and just ensure that there's no other questions that I'm missing on the screen here. I don't see any. Okay. So question, are our contracts at risk if the budget impasse continues? Well, if the budget impasse continues indefinitely, I would say yes, because you wouldn't be able to be reimbursed. You do have authorization to move forward with your project, and we are as certain as we can be as far as the reimbursement of those costs. These are federal grant funds. We have a federal notice of obligation to draw these funds. So the risk of a kind of a unilateral suspension is extremely low. We do not anticipate that situation. I should also, and let's see, another question. So there, to be clear, if our project isn't scheduled to end until June of 2016, at which time will we reimburse the company to continue? Wait, let's see. At which time will we reimburse the company? We are good to continue with it, correct? Well, that is, I guess that's the point of what we're trying to communicate, is that each project is going to be different. The expectations that you have working with your companies, working with your training providers, understand that you won't have the cash available to you until there is a budget in place. So if you are, if you can come to an agreement with the companies, with your training providers that, move forward with the project, and, you'll provide the reimbursement when the funds are available, and everyone is in agreement to that, then move forward. If they are not agreeable to that, then you need to readjust your project timelines, and that is certainly something that we can work with you on. We understand that most of these projects were set up as a 12-month grant, and certainly this will or could have a potential impact on that. And so we would work with you on a project modification. and we'll go over the logistics of that further in the presentation. Okay, so I think I'm going to go ahead, if there aren't any other questions on the budget piece, and move forward to the kind of the highlighted grant requirements. And as I mentioned at the outset of the call, for many of you, this is going to be a bit remedial, or you've heard this before, but again, we thought it important to highlight these requirements so that we're all on the same page. And again, if folks that are new grantees, if you have questions, or existing grantees, if you could please hold those to the end, and we'll take care of those kind of at the last Q&A piece. So Scarlett, if you could go ahead and mute those phones again, and we'll go through these next requirements pretty quickly here. So this is just a laundry list of the topics that we're going to go over. All this information is included in your grant agreement, so that that 35 or 40 page document that the department issued in June to you, highlights or has these grant provisions included. Also included with your grant agreement should have been what the department calls a welcome package. And it's a letter from our director, Jim Schultz, that just confirms information about the grant, but then also highlights some of the reporting requirements, and again, just kind of highlights some of the project deliverables. And many of the provisions, as you would assume, are put in place by the law, by the regulations, and then as a result of audit directives. So you may question, why do we have to provide certain reports, certain timelines, especially if there is no activity that is taking place. And again, as you're aware, these are federal grant funds, and we have the responsibility to ensure that they're expended correctly, and as part of our policies and procedures that are audited several times a year by different entities and firms, require pretty strict guidelines around the information that we have to collect from you. So go ahead and start first with the audit requirements. Section 3.1 of the grant agreement outlines the audit requirements, and so you submit your regular audit to DCEO for the period for the entire period that the grant is open. You need to submit those audits to DCEO. A basic requirement, again, these are federal funds, and they are governed by the new uniform guidance that replaced a bunch of different regulations around the administration of federal grant funds. One of the constants requirements is fund accounting. We require a quarterly financial status reports and supporting documentation, and also require a trial balance that ties back to the budgets. So Part 1 of your grant agreement outlines the line item budget, and we need your trial balance to tie back to the budget. Fiscal reporting requirements, this is pretty basic. Your grantee's financial management system must be structured to provide accurate and complete disclosure of the financial results of the project that's funded by this grant. Your general ledger must support cost and revenue reports reported to the department, and again, we must be able to trace the funds. Quarterly reports reiterates this. We utilize a standard grant report, and I believe the majority of you are familiar with this report. Some of our new grantees, this may be something that you're learning and working through. And I know that Lorraine has sent this information to our to all the grantees. Is that right, Lorraine?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great. So any questions, logistic questions around, submitting or completing those standard grant report, Lorraine Wareham can help you out with those. It is a project report and also a financial report, and we'll talk about some of the other activity systems, the systems that you report your activity in, if it's the through the IWDS system or through the incumbent worker tracking system, are primary places where we track the activity of program participants. Subgrantees must obtain written approval before you subcontract. Note that we don't consider like a training agreement or an individual training account. We don't consider that as a subcontract that requires prior approval. Any of your subcontractors or subgrantees, they must be aware of and comply with the conditions of our master agreement. And I think that's pretty straightforward. Internal controls, again, this is a standard that grantees are accountable for all grant funds received. You must maintain effective control and accountability over the grant funds, the equipment, property, or other activity that is occurring and being paid for under the grant. Internal controls, we require written internal control procedures. And again, they look to timely bank reconciliations with the separation or segregation of duties, proper approvals of disbursements, having a system that requires a significant level of detail and supporting documentation for disbursements. And again, here's just kind of a laundry list of things that we look for in a policies and procedures. Again, this is all to ensure accountability around grant funds. Goes without saying that grant funds have to be directly tied and support the activity outlined in your scope of work. We talked briefly about the impact that the budget impasse may have on your scope of work and the timing of your project. And as we move forward, we certainly will work with you, Lorraine and Deb Waldrop and Patrick Campbell, who are kind of the key folks on the team here. We'll work with you to, if there is a modification that is needed, to work out the details of that. Expenditure of fund principles. Grant expenditure should be made in accordance with generally accepted sound business practices with arm's length bargaining and acceptable with applicable federal and state laws and regulations. Um, they should not exceed the amount that would be incurred by a prudent person. So just because it's federal grant funds, it doesn't mean that you can pay or you can have a vendor pay quote unquote a government price that is higher than other other charges or other have a tiered system of charges. That definitely is not allowable. And the grant accounting should be consistent with generally accepted accounting principles. Talked about only costs necessary to complete the program objectives. Some of the items that are not allowed, unnecessary costs are prohibited. Food, alcohol, entertainment are prohibited. Gifts, donations, fundraising, promotional materials are prohibited. But promotional materials don't mean, a outreach for participants for a program. So if you're trying to outreach to dislocated workers, those types, and it was included in your project plan, those types of costs are allowable. Uniforms and tools might be allowable if it's required if you're working with an OJT project or with a paid work experience project, those could be allowable. And then any other, what we would just generically call field trip costs to register work sites might be allowable. Again, if you got some work-based training and there are, if there are costs associated with sending trainees out into the field, that's directly included in the project plan, those costs could be allowable as well. I want to point out that costs may be disallowed if they are duplicative, and obviously we understand that many projects are folks might be funded or enrolled in multiple state and federal programs. It's important. It's important that you don't double dip and charge both grants for the same activity. A couple of questions as we're going here. How about supportive services costs? Yes, so that's definitely allowable. Those are allowable, and those are noted in those would be noted in your project plan, and so obviously those would be allowable. Let's see, another question. If we didn't identify OJT costs in our original budget but have realized there will be PPE needed, can we still submit the expenses? If it's in the overall OJT, if you had budgeted for OJTs, I have to understand, more what those costs look like, and so we would have to talk about that offline. So I would, Kathleen, if we could talk about that with Lorraine offline, I think that would be most appropriate. Okay, cost allowability. Again, we talked about arm's length bargaining, and obviously, the conflict of interest or the prohibiting or ensuring that that there aren't conflicts of interest. Those are critical elements, and I think the next slide talks about that. But again, this goes to some common sense regulations around the grant. Compensation must be reasonable. Bonuses, they must be pursuant to, an established written policy. It couldn't be, you can't receive a bonus just for being awarded this grant. Reserves for severance pay or UI may be unallowable. We refer you back to the cost principles, and contractual employees must be properly classified and have proper documentation. Travel expenses should be in accordance with the latest state travel regs, and Lorraine can help you out with that if you need to, um, um, know where that is located. I think it's on the Central Management Services website if you've got questions about that. I didn't think that there was a whole lot of travel in looking at some of these budgets. I didn't see a whole lot of travel included. But again, grantees must retain the receipts and have all of the backup documentation to support those costs. Allocation of costs. We'll point out even if a proposed budget states that a certain percentage of payroll or facilities costs will be charged to the grant, the actual allocation of the cost must be based on the actual activity of the cost that reflects the benefits received. So just because your budget was approved for a certain line item, we still have to see that that activity took place, and that activity went to support the grant project. So just because you have an approved project, doesn't give you kind of license to say, well, it's just a flat rate. You need to verify that cost. Conflict of interest. Again, I want to point out the importance of this. Again, emphasize these are federal tax funds and federal grant funds from taxpayers, and we cannot have conflicts of interest. We'll point out that a conflict of interest exists if a grantee, officers, directors, agents, employers, or family members use their position for a purpose that gives the appearance of being motivated for private gain, financial or non-financial. If there is a potential conflict of interest, you need to notify the department in writing. So that's critically important. We know that in certain cases there may be family or other ties associated with a certain project. We have seen that in the past, and there have been instances where the department has approved that. But again, if there is even a perceived conflict of interest, you're required to immediately notify the department. Any budget variations, we've talked about modification, and Lorraine and the team can help you with these. If you determine that your expenditures will vary from your line items, you must submit a written modification request. And I should mention that a modification could be for a budget. It could be for your project scope of work, including the timeline and the number of individuals served and the type of training, and a date extension is also another common type of modification. So as I mentioned, do understand that we may need to modify these grants, modify the scope, and the timeline perhaps to extend these projects out on a case-by-case basis. Program income. Grant funds paid in advance must be kept in an interest-bearing account and maintained and used in accordance with the grant agreement. Any interest earned must be spent on grant activities or returned to the department. Confidential information. This is key. This is obviously with as we get more and more digital, identity theft has become a kind of a prevalent issue. You read the news reports of identity theft in the public and the private sector, And so this is an area where, we have to be conscious and take steps to safeguard personally identifiable information. The bottom line is only provide the staff that is required for the intake of the personal information. Obviously, we have our systems that we require to you to track eligibility and track the services that are provided, and you need to make sure that the staff that is provided access to those systems is using it appropriately, and that you have procedures in place that safeguard that information, so you don't have reports with social security numbers and those types of things just available for others in your office to potentially see. As I've alluded to, reporting requirements for any grant project that is operating on the job training grants or other dislocated worker services, you use the Illinois Workforce Development Systems, and there's a whole set of guidelines on how to use those systems. Typically, local workforce areas staff are designated as the folks that will utilize this system. For incumbent worker projects, we use a system that is on the Illinois WorkNet platform, and it is the incumbent worker tracking system. And Lorraine, it's my understanding that we did a webinar recently on this. Is that right?
Yes, we did, and it's out on the site, the WorkNet site, so it's accessible. The webinar is accessible to see. It was recorded.
Great. And so we'll have, as a follow-up to this webinar, we'll also send you some information and additional resources that are at the end of our slide deck here, which I believe will have the link to that training as well. Oh, and there it is. Thank you, Scarlett. She posted the direct link right there. Okay, we'll take a quick pause here. Question: when you are just budgeted for tuition and book fees, do I just bill as the classes go? I think that we should probably talk about that offline as well. Basically, as there's a number of ways to answer that question. It depends on your training institution and when they require payment. Some training providers require half up front, or they provide a registration fee, and then there is a drop dead date where the remaining balance is due. And so it would all depend on what your training providers are requiring you to post. But at the point where you are obligated to pay for those training funds, that's the point when those costs, you should be accruing those costs. Let's see, Tom Peters, will there be future trainings on IWDS which show the modifications in the systems to accommodate the new WIOA policies? And the answer is yes. And so I don't have a specific date on those, but I do know that webinars will be provided. Scarlett, would you happen to know the answers to that? If not, we can follow back with you, Tom. Okay, so monitoring and technical assistance. The grant will be monitored for compliance in accordance with the grant agreement. That's a requirement of the federal regs, and we typically have on-site monitoring. For these grants, it's usually maybe maybe 2 or 3 days. We do request some information at the kind of at the front end of this, and hopefully we can minimize our time in your office, so you can do your so we're out of your hair basically. I do want to note that outside of the formal monitoring process, we do have ongoing technical assistance, and Pat Campbell and Deb Waldrop and their teams have staff that have probably already talked to you about the grant project. And so our idea here is that these folks are here as a resource along with Lorraine to help you with the project. We know that there's a significant amount of regulation and requirements and red tape, and so the purpose of our technical assistance folks is not to to get into micromanaging a project or formally monitoring the project. It's basically to give you information and assistance and point you to additional resources so the project can be successful. And that's really the bottom line is that we've seen that this type of approach is more effective with these non-formula grants, where we can be a direct resource and answer a question. We've got a couple of years of experience with these talent pipelines, but our staff has several years of experience with running workforce grants, and please utilize them as a resource moving forward. Okay. As I mentioned, additional resources are here. Talent Pipeline will continue to update information on the overall program website. The DCEO Office of Accountability. So if you have any questions about our standard quarterly reports or the audit reports or any other kind of DCEO grant type question you want to poke around there, you can go to that website. We've mentioned the Incumbent Worker Tracking System Guide that is posted there. And then finally, the DCEO training staff, Pat Campbell, Deb Waldrop, Lorraine Wareham, and they are there for your assistance as well. So I've talked quite a bit, and I guess I would open up the floor now if there's any questions, or Lorraine or Deb, if you have anything that you want to add.
Well, I do want to mention that the quarterly report that's due is this is Lorraine, by the way, is called the DECIO Grantee Report, which is the DGR. And just make sure that whoever signs the form has signature authority, and the signature authority was given to us, whoever had signature authority was given to us with your application, and that's what we go off of. And then also, after a period of time, if you don't get your report in a timely manner, then they lock the funds down. So we like to get those in and get them processed as soon as possible. And you will receive a notice from our system saying when your reports are due. I also want to mention that if you have an incumbent worker project, you will also have a quarterly report within the incumbent worker tracking system. So there are 2 separate reports for those people. And that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lorraine. And again, she talks about kind of system controls and locks, and these are things that our accountability office has put in place as kind of a result of our audits and kind of procedures, just to ensure that again we're accounting for the federal funds, and that we understand that it's a lot of information that you have to report on, and again, that's why Lorraine and the rest of the team is here to assist.
Right, and John, this is Deb Waldrop from Marion. Just wanted to point out that our staff has already started the technical assistance reviews, and I know for some that might seem early, but for the purpose that you just mentioned, we're familiarizing ourselves with the project, so if there are any grantees that don't have their entries in the Incumbent Worker Training System, the IWTS system, or if you're having difficulties, if the assigned representative has contacted you and you have questions, please feel free to talk to them about that, as well as Lorraine. But know that the purpose of the early beginning and the technical assistance review is for us as much as well as you, so we familiarize ourselves with the projects. And like I said, it is important, and John has emphasized it's important that we have all that data up to up to speed, and so, and Lorraine, so that the reporting continues and that the funds can continue if and when we get the budget authority, the spending authority lined out. But just thank you for your patience. If you have not had contact from a representative regarding your project, you should have it soon. So thanks again.
John, did you want to cover the state budget impact information on the people regarding for the people who were late entering the meeting?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'll I know that, thanks for mentioning that. I'm just going to go back to kind of one of the key pieces of information that we wanted to ensure everyone was aware of, and for folks who you don't have any other questions, feel free to jump off now, but I would reiterate that our accounting office has confirmed that grantees can continue to incur costs per the terms of your grant agreements. I do want to point out, and it's critically important for you to understand, that grantees cannot be reimbursed for costs incurred after July 1st until there is a state budget. So if you need to make adjustments to your project plan, we will work with you on that. So project plan in the scope of work, timelines in the scope of work. Again, we're hopeful that you may have training providers, you may have companies that you're working with that are able to accept an agreement where we're not certain when a reimbursement will come. So if you have a situation where your providers can hold their billing, that's great. Go ahead and proceed. But we recognize that some providers, some companies, other projects, it's just not going to be feasible. And if that's the case, we want to ensure that you're aware that this is you're not going to be able to be reimbursed until there is a state budget. If you do have costs that occurred or were accrued for June, so anything up to June 30th, and you have not submitted a cash request or have not posted for those funds, please do so by this Wednesday, and we will be able to pay for those costs. But after August 5th, we won't have the ability to provide cash until there is a state budget.
Something I should have mentioned, I apologize, is the quarterly reports for the people who have incumbent worker grants. Those reports in IWTS are not going to be due for the first time until September 30th. You do not have a quarterly report due until September 30th. So,
And just to piggyback on that, and so overall, there's that, what is it, the DCEO quarterly grant report, right? So that has an overview of your project report and your financial reports. And essentially, what you're doing for on a project report, you're checking the box, and you're saying that the substantive information for the project is provided in another system, and especially for incumbent workers, that's through that incumbent worker tracking system on the Illinois WorkNet platform. And so the federal regs require us to have that, is it a quarterly or is it a monthly report? I'm not certain. Deb, I don't, or Lorraine, is it quarterly or monthly?
quarterly.
Quarterly, okay. So the regs require a quarterly report there, and so that's why we have that system set up. And it may seem like, oh, I got to go here and I have to go there, and so unfortunately the answer is yes, you have to report in both places. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and sign off. And if there are any other specific project questions, we'll be happy to, please contact any of the DCEO team here. And as we receive additional information regarding the budget situation and the impact on your grants, we will be certain to send that to you. So thank you again for your time this morning, and have a good day.
Wait, we have one more question,
Oh, okay.
John.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Diane Schuler asked, what if there is no budget this fiscal year?
Well, very bad things will happen. I don't anticipate that situation will happen, but we'll have to provide additional information when kind of as we go. And again, this is purpose is to provide you with the information that we know at this point. But unfortunately, we can't speculate as to what would happen here. So with that, I will sign